So Judge Donald, thank you so much for coming today. On behalf of the students and faculty, we are thrilled for you to be here this week. So the purpose of this conversation is just to learn more about you as a judge, your personal life. So future students, current students can learn about, what it is that is really important to you.
Okay.
So I have a couple questions that I'll ask you, but this can be very conversational.
Sure.
One thing I noticed looking at your resume and your past is you were born in Mississippi. You were the sixth child of 10.
Yes, I was number 6 of 10.
Could you describe that experience and how that was?
Well, Stephen, let me first of all thank you this morning for arranging the interview. And I just want to thank the university and the law school really for facilitating the opportunity for me to be here on campus and to meet incredible students. You all have so much to be proud of, and there's been amazing energy on this campus. I've been here now for 2 days. This is day 3, and it has been an incredible experience. It's been sort of nonstop, and I have benefited greatly from having been here. I grew up one of 10, number 6 of 10 children, to parents who were not highly educated. My mother was a wise woman, but lacked a lot of formal education. My father was a self-taught mechanic, but they both had a firm belief in family, in work, and they instilled in us a really strong value system and a determination, tempered with a willingness and a knowledge that one had to work hard to achieve our goals. They were people who taught us that we had a responsibility to work hard, to be the best people we could be, to respect all people. And one of the interesting things that my mother especially instilled in us, because we grew up during a time of fairly deep segregation.
Sure.
She taught us that we could not ever afford the luxury of hate, because that diminished you. It diminished the soul and the spirit. And she said that there's good in all people, but you have to look for that sometimes. She also taught us that we were as good as anybody else, but that we were no better than anybody else. And I think that philosophy helped shape me as a person. They taught us that if you got paid for an 8-hour day, you needed to work an 8-hour day, because if you did less than that, that was stealing, and that was against the Bible. So it was interesting that we had parents who were strict disciplinarians, and while they weren't educated, they saw education as a way to advance in society. So they encouraged us to be educated and to really be the best we could be. I think one of the most critical lessons my mother taught me, and that was the ability to stand, even if I had to stand alone, that people are not always going to agree with you. But if you believed in what you were working toward or standing for, stand even if it meant you had to stand by yourself. And just anecdotally, before I told you I grew up during segregation.
Right.
So the school that I attended was an all-black school. Mississippi did not desegregate its schools until the late 60s. So while I was at the all-black school, we used to have these talent programs, and I didn't have any talent, but I wanted to be on the talent program. And so I had this love of poetry. And Stephen, there was this poem that by Robert Frost called The Road Not Taken. And so I went to the talent coordinator and talked to her, told her I wanted to be on the talent program and I wanted to recite a poem, and she thought that was ludicrous. But I was persistent, and so she finally agreed to allow me to be on the talent program. And on that particular Wednesday, I was on the talent program. I was really, really excited about it. And I went out on the stage to recite my poem, and I literally got booed, and people tried to boo me off the stage.
Really?
But sensing that I might never get an opportunity, I think because of my mother's training, I was able to stand and recite that poem, even though my colleagues didn't hear me. And it was an humiliating experience, but it was a real important life lesson for me. And I share that with young people because, so many children we hear will not pursue things that they know to be things that would demonstrate how smart they are.
Right.
They're afraid of being different. And so my folks taught me early, just to stand, and even if you get booed, you still stand
Sure.
if you believe in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. So it was a loving environment. We were, from a materialistic point of view, poor, but didn't feel that way because we always had lots of loving people around us with a family that large.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it seems like an incredible parents you had who taught you a lot. And I'm sure that probably translates to how you are as a judge.
I think it does. In fact, I have said from time to time, law school taught me to be a lawyer, but my parents taught me to be a judge, because so much of what judging is about is the ability to listen,
Right.
the ability to treat people with respect, the ability to be impartial, to hear all sides, to be able to decide, and to be able to do that from a position of authority, but authority tempered by respect and a willingness that the judge really is tasked with listening to all sides and applying the rules and the law impartially without fear or favor.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's a really, really, I like your perspective as a judge. One question I had, other than your parents, did you have any role models growing up that you aspired to be like?
I had my teachers. Now, keep in mind, I grew up in a fairly agrarian community, so the people in my community, because our community was literally black and white, and so the people in my community were largely teachers and preachers and farmers. But my teachers and some of the ministers were people that I really respected and admired. I read a lot because the ability to read in the library was my way of being able to get beyond my small community and to experience a world that was larger than where I lived. And as I grew, in addition to those teachers that I emulated, I suppose a person that I was most inspired by, in addition to my parents, was first President Kennedy and Thurgood Marshall. And President Kennedy, I mean, I cannot today read his words, his speeches, or go to the Kennedy Library and hear his voice without experiencing chills, because no matter what was going on, if you look at his eloquence and his words and his vision, he lifted us and really caused us to believe in something that was larger than ourselves. And in his rhetoric, there was no division. It was the oneness and the fullness and the majesty of possibilities that was America. And that was the kind of thing that I could be a part of, and
sure.
really just sort of transposed me. And I know that there are always people in your life who are close to you, but that was so important. And I think just not for me, but I think for people who lived during that time, and obviously Thurgood Marshall for the breaking of barriers that he did through advocacy in the courts, because the courts were certainly a central part of the existence then. Although I, as a child, didn't really know any lawyers until suppose in my early teens, when young lawyers came to Olive Branch to help desegregate public institutions and register people to vote. In fact, there were young lawyers who came to our community and they had to stay in the citizens' homes because they were outside agitators.
Wow. Okay.
And because Olive Branch at that time didn't have a hotel. So even if people wanted to stay in the hotels, there were no hotels for them to stay in.
Wow.
But there were these three young white lawyers who came and they stayed in our homes. There were two guys and one girl. Two of them were from New York and one was from California. And they were young. And I just looked at these people and thought, how amazing that people can be that unselfish and travel that far and put their lives at risk to help a people that they don't even know.
Yeah.
They had no obligation to do that.
It's remarkable.
They didn't know us. But there they were because they believed in our founding documents. They believed in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and they believed in those words that extolled equality, and realized that our actions as a nation did not match our rhetoric, and they came to work. And I marveled at those young people. I did not keep in touch with them. I don't know their last names or first names anymore, but it was a really good experience.
I mentioned a very transformative time in America.
It really was.
Something that, I mean, I've often thought about, I would have liked to have witnessed what was going on then. I mean, we get to enjoy the fruits of it today.
Yes.
Was there a pivotal moment in your life? I mean, maybe it was when you saw those lawyers, but maybe not, that you said to yourself, I want to be committed to justice. I want to pursue law.
It was much later.
Okay.
When I saw those people, I thought I'd love to be a lawyer. But when I looked at them and I looked at me, there was nothing about me that suggested that I could do what they did, because I was so different. They were different. We were different from each other. So I went on to college, and I went to college with the idea that I would become a teacher. And then while I was in college, I discovered sociology and decided that I would major in that. But I've always been a volunteer. And when I was a volunteer at juvenile court, and I witnessed children in the court system, children who were detained and children who were going through the process, it was their experience that caused me to decide that I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to represent children. And I have to say, to this day, I've never represented a child, but that's what got me into law school. And it was a similar experience after I became a lawyer in court that caused me to want to become a judge. I think that all of us as stakeholders in the justice system have an obligation, first of all, to try to make certain that justice is fairly administered and fairly applied, and that people believe that they have actually received or experienced justice. And as a judge, I have an obligation to make certain that people coming into the courtroom believe that they can get a fair shot, that no matter of their gender, their race, their sexual orientation, their socioeconomic status, that the court provides a level playing field for them. And I work every day to try and do that. Now, I have to tell you, we're not there yet.
Right.
Many people perceive that justice is not fair and that justice is not administered fairly. But we have an obligation to continue to work to make sure that every individual believes that regardless of the outcome, that the process has been fair and they've been treated fairly with dignity and respect.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And along those lines, what would you say to a young child today or a youth today who faces discrimination, who faces obstacles to either justice or even pursuing a career? They feel like they can't do it.
I would tell a child largely what my mother told me, that even though you experience that, do not let that experience define you, and do not let it cause you to become bitter or disillusioned. Remember Nelson Mandela, who was wrongly imprisoned for 27 years, he said, the day I walked out of that prison, I knew that if I didn't leave hatred behind, I would forever be imprisoned. And you can experience an act of discrimination, but you have to move beyond that. Take that, learn from that, try to do what you can to eliminate it, but do not let it define and do not let it bind you. Because that one act, unfortunate as it may be, must be a launch pad for you to make certain that you do everything you can to create an environment of equality.
Right.
But you can't lock into that experience and stay there. And you can't assume an attitude of bitterness, and you can't assume a vengeful attitude. I think anybody who's ever been the victim of discrimination should want to work to make sure that no one experiences that kind of discrimination. So that's Certainly. What I would tell them. Certainly. And I would also tell them, do not latch on to the crutches that says, because I am this, because the world sees me this way, I can't. Stay focused on what you can do.
I think that's really good advice.
Yeah.
Now, as a judge, how how has your highest aspirations of what you wanted to see in the law, is it commensurate with what you actually see day to day? Do you feel like you're able to make an impact of change, or do you feel constricted in any ways?
I will say this, that no person can do everything, but everybody can do something. And that sounds trite, but I think it's true. As a single judge, and I think that I made major accomplishments, not just through the rulings that I made, but through the way I ran the court, the way I spoke to the issues, the way that I strove every day
Sure.
to ensure justice, but also the things I did in the community to really uphold our institutions, the institution of the judiciary, and for people to see somebody who looks like me there.
Right.
People need to be able to look around and see folks who look like them. We need to see the pluralism that is America in our institutions, and I think even that is part of making a difference. Today, I serve on the Court of Appeals, and I am probably one, I believe, of 6 or 7 African American women across the nation who actively serve on courts of appeal. And while I don't make single decisions, but my voice and my perspective and my lens is important. It's important that you have diverse voices and people from diverse experiences around the table when you're deciding issues. We are applying the rules of law, but law doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
And all of us look at the law and we interpret it through the lens of our experience. And all of that comes to bear. That doesn't mean that we are applying the law in a partisan or there's no African American female version of the law or no white male version
Sure.
of the law. But all of us as people read the law, and sometimes we come away from that with different nuances.
Right.
So it's important for all of us to sort of talk about that rule, and sometimes our being, our person, our experiences informs the different ways we see that rule or that statute. So I think that's important.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Is there a particular opinion you wrote or anything you've done in the community that you would say is your defining achievement or something you're most proud of?
Unfortunately, I don't, there's no particular thing that I would point to as a thing that defines me, but there's something that I am really proud of. As a trial judge, I tried the first federal death penalty prosecution in Western Tennessee. And it was a horrible case. There was horrible loss from the standpoint of the victims, and there was loss from the standpoint of the defense. When you get to a capital case, there are no winners, in my view. And in this case, it was, as I said, it was a terrible case. But after it was over, and we had gone through the mitigation phase and gone back through the background of the defendant before he became a defendant. In fact, his attorneys went back through from the time he was born up to the events that led to the act that brought him before the courts. And it left me with a feeling that in so many instances, we as a community and as a nation are neglecting young people. There are things that happen in the lives of children that often define their destiny. Mm-hmm. And if we don't take the responsibility to make certain that children have the things they need to have a healthy development, to have strong values, to have the education and the mental health treatment, and the support that they need, we end up sort of losing in the back end. So when I finished this case, I went to lunch with my younger sister, and we decided over lunch, as I thought about that case and I thought about the circumstances that drove us there, we decided that we wanted to form an organization to help at-risk inner city kids who perhaps did not have, a mentor, who did not know basic things. So we formed a group that we called For Life. And we worked with children 5 years old to about 15. And we worked with them, and this was the basic program. We taught them how to engage in an appropriate telephone conversation.
That's a good, valuable skill.
How to eat an appropriate meal. How to read the newspaper. In fact, in order to be a part of the program, you had to have a library card. How to use the library. As I said, how to read the newspaper. How to discuss what you read in the newspaper. Appropriate dress. How to fill out a resume. We acquainted them with different job opportunities. And the amazing thing about this, Stephen, was that many of the parents and grandparents came to the sessions, which were held at the library, and they marveled at these children who would stand up to tell us what they read in the newspaper. We would have them go through role playing. And it was something that just didn't happen for a lot of these children. And it was some of the most enjoyable work that I did. I've since become very busy, and we have sort of put the program on hold, but I look forward to a time when we can go back and resume that, because I think sowing that kind of hope into the lives of children is really important. And if I can just spend a couple of other minutes to share with you one specific incident that resonated with me. We had the people from the Shelby County Sheriff's Department come out to the program, which was on Saturdays, and talk to the kids about, the dangers of gangs. And because we had parents and grandparents there, we wanted to put the grandparents and parents in different rooms, because we didn't think the children would be honest if the parents were in the same room. So we separated them, and I stayed with the children. The gang coordinator talked with the kids, and he asked them, and there were about 15, 16 of them in the room. He said, how many of you know someone who is in a gang? And every child in the room, including the 5-year-old, raised their hand. Now, the 5-year-old might have just been raising their hand because other people were raising their hands. And then he asked them, how many of you have ever been approached by someone to become a part of a gang? And several hands went up. And then he asked, how many of you have ever considered joining a gang? And 2 hands went up, 2 young men. And it just really struck me. So we started to focus our attention on, more intensely on those 2 children. One of the young men who raised his hand was in a really difficult situation. His mother was engaged in a lifestyle that embarrassed him, and he was just sort of really acting out. And we were able to get this child in a position where we supported him to talk to his mother. He was really the child of a single parent, and she was involved in a relationship that was fairly unhealthy. But she allowed him to go and live with his parents in an intact family. And this child, we monitored him. He was able to graduate high school. I went by one Saturday by his home, and he was out there with his cousin and the cousin's father. They were actually planting things in a garden, and he seemed like he was so happy and so content. I went to his high school graduation. He wanted to go into the military. He didn't do that, but he did go to junior college, and he got an HVAC degree. And, we can't save everybody, but there are a lot of good children who really just need someone to reach out and give them an alternative. And that work was some of the most important work for me, and brought me such personal gratification.
And that message resonates with me. I worked at the Innocence Project here. So much of what we found during that experience was, if you could just be proactive early on, and many of these people, some of them were actually, truly they were criminals. Others were innocent, but the theme was, they came from bad neighborhoods, bad experiences. So I definitely understand that.
And Stephen, one of the things that is really amazing now is we are learning a lot more about brain science.
Yes.
And we're learning how what we do or don't do to brains early on will really influence that behavior. So a lot of the work that's going on in neuroscience lets us know that when we are not giving children healthy nutrition and guidance early on in their lives, that can affect their life possibilities later on. And when I look at these food deserts, where children, youngsters, are not getting adequate nutrition, they're not getting sleep, they're living in neighborhoods where they're witnessing violence day in and day out, they are experiencing this kind of trauma. That's problematic. I put on a program when I was chair of the criminal justice section, and I had a doctor from Harvard come in, Dr. Kerry Ressler, and he's been doing this research um, on children and adults really who grow up in high poverty, high violent, high density communities.
Yeah.
And he says that often children who live day in and day out in those communities that are violent and densely populated, where they don't have the kinds of things that you and I have been talking about, that those children often have higher levels of PTSD than people on the front lines of war zones.
Wow.
And that often goes untreated. And so there are all of these things that are sort of converging, which make you wonder, how we do as well as we do, and how so many children are able to actually go beyond those. And that doesn't mean that every child is going to, who's in that environment is going to not make it, but there are a lot of forces that
Sure.
that really we need to give attention to if we really want to give children the highest chance of success.
Exactly. In your speech on Monday, I totally agree. You said sometimes are we criminalizing poverty
Yes.
or mental illness, and I agree with that. Which leads me to my next question,
Okay.
which is what is the responsibility of the law? Where should the law come in here versus community activism? I mean, it seems like you've done both. Should the law be taking a more proactive approach on these issues?
I suppose as a judge, that's really
And that might be going
hard.
beyond what. Yeah.
I think that's hard for me to say, but I do think that law has a firm and prominent role in an ordered society. But I would ask policymakers, those on the legislative side and those on the executive side, to when we're talking about law, to really sort of think through what is it that the law is designed to do, what do we hope to accomplish, and then try to have broad-based input so that you can avoid what I believe to be some of the unintended consequences of some of the laws. Law is a necessary and critical part, I think, of any ordered society, any certainly democracy. But I think that we have to step back and in passing laws, take a long view and then have an honest and frank assessment of what is it that the law is designed to do, and have broad-based input.
Sure.
So that people can help us sort of engage in the visioning of how that law is going to be applied, and if it is in fact going to accomplish the objective that the drafters and the policymakers intended.
Sure. As I know many young students who are thinking about going into law, and they're hearing conflicting messages. They say, the world doesn't need any more lawyers, or, the job market's not great. What would you say to those students? Do you think the world needs more lawyers, or what would you say to an aspiring law student?
I believe that the law is a noble profession. I believe that we will always need lawyers. I think that we will find lawyers embracing broader and different roles in the world. Not everybody is going to go to court and litigate tort cases, or not everybody's going to go and be transactions, but the kind of skills that lawyers learn, the analytical skills, the sense of history, I think that is going to be important in always. If you look back over this nation's presidents, many of them have been lawyers. If you look at our in the Congress, I think you have a higher number of lawyers than you do any other profession. But I think that the skills and the knowledge of the law is important in so many areas. And as our society becomes increasingly more complex, I think that you're going to find increasing in different roles for lawyers. And yes, there may be some problems with jobs in the traditional mode of lawyers, but I think lawyers are finding, and they're recreating or creating new opportunities, and society is, I think, creating new opportunities. So I would not, if I were starting out today, I think I would still go into the professional law, because I think that there's no better and higher calling.
Well, that's encouraging for me. I'm about to graduate.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess my follow-up question would be, if you could go back and change anything, or if you could give someone like me who's about to embark on my own legal career advice, what would you tell your former self?
Well, if I could go back and start over again, I think the one thing I would do is probably I would have taken more international law courses, because when I started, the world was quite small. But I think now the work I've done has enabled me to discover a much larger world. And what I have found as I have gone around the world to focus on whether it's human rights or whether it's intellectual property, and I'm kind of finding that there is a sort of a direct correlation between strong legal enforcement regimes and laws that allow and the laws that allow people to protect their intellectual property and to engage in activities that are designed to increase and strengthen society, that those are the societies that really have the stronger infrastructures, and those are the stronger, economic regimes and those kind of things. Sure. And so I think there's a direct correlation between having those strong laws and strong protections and all of that that allows them to thrive. So I think I would have done more international law and probably more economics. But for you, as a young lawyer, I would say just find what brings you, find something in the law about which you can be passionate. And when you find that thing, put yourself into that, you will be successful. You will obviously end up helping people. And what I tell young lawyers is, yes, law will allow you to make a wonderful living, but do not go into law with a narrow view that I'm going to go into an area where I can make a lot of money. You may make a lot of money, but if you go into it and that's your goal, to make a lot of money, that will not provide you happiness.
Certainly.
You have to find something about which you're passionate, and you have to provide a service. That's what's going to bring you joy, and that's what's going to serve you well long term.
I really appreciate the advice. That's very helpful. My last question today, and it's a broad one, but what do you hope your legacy is?
I hope my legacy as a judge will have been that I applied the law fairly, that I have a legacy of inclusion, of promoting and developing respect for the law, and raising or increasing confidence in the law. I hope that my legacy will be too that I spent time trying to reduce bias that leads to a lack of justice and equality. And finally, that I help to increase confidence in the legal system, and that I called the shots fairly and impartially.
Well, Judge Donald, thank you so much for speaking with us today, and I really appreciated hearing everything you had to say.
Thank you.
I'm sure it helped me a lot, and I'm sure other students are really going to appreciate it as well.
Thank you so much, and I really thank the university and the students for the hospitality that I've been shown on the campus this week. Thank you.
Thanks.